Well, hello, everybody, and happy Tuesday. Tonight, we are going to be talking about one of the most historic and intense naval deployments in recent history. The ship USS Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group was involved in one of the most intense firefights since World War II. They were extended 2 times. Their aircraft flew 27,000 flight hours, answered 2 distress calls, one with 24 civilian mariners, and spent 275 days at sea from November 2023 to June 2024. And today I have with me Captain Chowdah, Chris Chowdah Hill. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks, Teresa. Doing well.
Well, this deployment for the Eisenhower Strike Group, it was one of the most historic times at sea, primarily because of so many clashes with the Iran-backed Houthi terrorist organization. And it was called one of the most intense sea battles the Navy has faced in nearly 8 decades. The intense combat pace meant scheduled port visits were canceled multiple times and a stretch of 6 months at sea before setting foot on land. And at the helm of this, and as guiding these principles, was a way of the warrior sailor, which is a 20-page command philosophy. We'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about Taco Tuesdays. There is a dog named Demo, a warrior of the day, cookies on the bridge, and other morale-boosting initiatives. And I think you will all see at the end of this call why my guest is a league of his own and how he leads from the front with a morale-first philosophy. So Captain Chris Hill, he is a native of Quincy, Massachusetts. He is a 1996 graduate of Tufts University with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science, magna cum laude. 2006 graduate of Georgetown University School of Foreign Service with a Master of Arts in Security Studies with honors, and a 2016 graduate of the Naval Nuclear Power Training Program, commissioned through the Navy ROTC program. He received his Wings of Gold as a naval flight officer in 1997, has operational tours, including Airborne Command and Control Squadron, VAW 126 from 98 to 01, Operation Southern Watch, Desert Fox during that time, and Deliberate Forge, with VAW 124 in 2004 as a weapons and tactics instructor, and then with VAW 115, 27 to 29 as a department head, with patrols in the Western Pacific, VAW 124 from 12 to 14 as the executive officer and commanding officer, and then operations with Operations Enduring Freedom, Inherent Resolve on the George W. Bush from 2017 to 2019 as the XO, and then again in Operation Inherent Resolve on the USS Arlington as the commanding officer. He assumed command of the Dwight D. Eisenhower on March 23rd, 2023, and was selected as the E-2 Hawkeye Naval Flight Officer of the Year in 2001. Welcome again, sir.
Thank you. Yep. 2001. That's a long time ago.
Yes. It's strange sometimes when I know I read these and people are like, "Oh my gosh!" It's always a little strange to hear your own bio being read back to you. But first, I want to start off with you're from Massachusetts, and I don't know if that's a big Navy area. So tell me a little bit about your backstory and what inspired you. I know your father was in the Navy, so tell me a little bit about how that got started for you.
So my dad was an ABE, Aviation Postmate Equipment, on the USS Kitty Hawk. And he served in the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of Vietnam as a young man. And when he was done with that, he eventually had me, and he inspired me to go into the Navy just by telling his stories. And I loved his stories. That was kind of like his bedtime thing. And as a kid, I used to wear his uniforms. I destroyed all his uniforms. They're gone. And he told me, "Hey, I want you to become an officer." I'm like, "Okay." So I went ahead and did that. What's kind of cool is I ended up serving on the Kitty Hawk in 2007 and 2008. Same ship as my dad, but he had passed away in 2002, so he didn't get to see that. But I think he'd be proud.
That's such a surreal moment when something like that happens. That's full circle like that.
Oh yeah.
Was there things about the Kitty Hawk that he told you about that you could recognize when you went out there?
Yeah, so he left this is interesting. He had a camera on his deployment. He took multiple pictures, mostly black and white. And he had a stack that was about 3 or 4 inches high. And I still have them. And when I was on the Kitty Hawk, and he had passed away now for several years at that point, a lot of the pictures were weird. There was like pictures of equipment and like pumps and like gauges. So I knew he worked on catapults. So I went around, I had some free time. I went around and tried to match the pictures with the actual equipment. and these tough ABEs are looking at me like, who is this guy? And I was like, and I showed them the pictures, and they're like, oh, okay, that's this gauge right here. And a lot of the stuff hadn't changed in decades. And so it was a moment where I kind of reconnected with him in a special way.
Yeah, that's really neat that you were able to do that. It reminds me of my father. He served in the U.S. Army. He was drafted, and he was actually in Armed Forces Radio and Television in Panama. So I
Yeah.
know even to this day, he's very proud that I went into public affairs, a communication related field,
Yeah.
because it sort of reminds him of things that he did when he was serving. So tell me a little bit about some of your early career milestones and what put you on the path to become a aircraft commanding officer. So what were some of those early jobs that you thought, oh, okay, I'm going to take command of an aircraft carrier one day?
I think it was in the mid-'80s, I watched Top Gun, and I wasn't really enamored by naval aviation like some people are. I looked at the guy in the tower who spilled the coffee on himself when Tom Cruise did the flyby, and I said, I wouldn't mind being that guy, because I get to be on an aircraft carrier. I didn't put the two and two together that there's also aircraft on an aircraft carrier. I was just a kid. But later on, by the time I was a CO of a squadron, that's when you have to kind of decide where you're going to go.
Right.
And are you going to, so, there's a whole second career after that if you want to stay in the military beyond 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so at some point, I decided in my command tour at BAW 124, so we had 4 Hawkeyes and about 150 people, that I really liked the idea of leadership and seeing, kind of experimenting with morale and seeing how that can improve success. And I saw it there. In fact, when I was the XO, my CO at the time, we talked about morale a lot, and we had like an equation on the board. So morale equals this, this, and this. And we struggled to figure out what were those key pieces. But we truly believe that if we could get that right, sort of everything would fall into place. People would care a little bit more. And if I have 150 people that care just a tiny bit more, then things should happen, right? And I think that did happen. And we talked a lot about being warriors, about war fighting. And it's a little weird that, I'm a Hawkeye guy and we're talking about being warriors, but we're sort of like the modern warriors, right? We facilitated actions in combat. And what's cool is when I became the CO of that squadron, we ended up doing that in Afghanistan and Iraq. And this was around the time that ISIS had invaded most of Iraq and Syria. And we were the first ones on the scene. We were the first aircraft over land to deal with that thing. It was June of 2014. So a lot of those principles all played out in a positive way. We did very well there too.
What do you think it is to motivate a sailor who feels overworked, undermanned, under-resourced? I think that's probably one of the things that I see that is the most detriment to morale, is not so much the fact that I think there are some really good people that can inspire and can coach and can motivate. But when you're dealing with a Navy that sometimes is overstretched, undermanned, under-resourced, it can just stress out even the best of people. So how is one of the ways that what you saw early on in your career that you were able to mitigate that?
Yeah. So philosophically, there's probably, I wouldn't say a breaking point. There's a limit to where morale can help. If first of all, you have to work in order to have morale. It sounds crazy, but like, how else as a leader am I going to reward you for doing something if we don't do something, right? So so we have to work. But then, after, working 7 days a week for months on end without poor calls, how do you motivate people in that situation? And the answer is it's really hard, right?
Yeah.
So you have to go out of your way to reward people. And I would say there's like a menu of ways to, provide sailor recognition, everything from a pat on the back to just being there to, giving them a cookie, to giving them a medal. The COs have a lot of powers to give away medals. I don't want to speak nonchalantly, like we're just giving these away. These are earned, right? And so you have to constantly think about it, because if you don't think about it, it won't happen, right? You'll get
Right.
stuck into your own little world. You're trying to deal with little crises, and you
Yep.
forget to go out there and say, "Hey, good job," and mention their name on the 1MC on the what do we call the 1MC? The interphone, the
Yeah.
PA system,
Yeah.
right?
PA system. Yeah. Intercom.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so that's part of it. But yeah, there's probably a breaking point. I don't know what that is, and I can't say that I saw it, in mass with all my people. Yeah, some people had a hard time, just like you would have a hard time on a long deployment anyway, because you're missing a lot of stuff at home, and there's not a lot of like, um, you don't know when you're coming back most of the time. We didn't. We get extended with no real end to it, and that lack of certainty can kind of tear at somebody.
Right,
But
right.
in those situations, you have, and we have gotten so much better at this. Just a huge resiliency team, right? And I could talk about some of these things. You have a deployed resiliency counselor. We have a licensed clinical social worker. We have a new thing called the EIPC. See if I get it right. Embedded Integrated Prevention Coordinator. This is a person that gives classes on stress management, breathing, uh,
Oh, that's great.
anything that's like holistic for the human person. The one we had was outstanding. All of ours were outstanding. We brought in Captain Demo, the dog,
Yes. I
and his
love the
job was
dog.
just to be there and reduce stress. And our initial studies of this, and we have a force psychologist who's actually working on this. He shows that yes, it does reduce stress for the sailors who have those interactions. And then morale being a piece of it, some of the traditional morale things like morale, welfare, and recreation. Our team did like 700 events this deployment. It was off the charts. I've never seen anything like it. They just didn't know any better. So our MWR officer, it was her first time doing it. She just did it. It was awesome. And we had a collaboration with the USO. We built this USO center just right prior to deployment. We had about 2,000 visits per week to this place. It was kind of like a pub without the booze.
Hmm.
You could go in there and just do some Wi-Fi and just sit around for a little bit, maybe play a video game. And the other thing was the Wi-Fi. So
Mm.
I don't say game changer too often, but for me it was, and I think it was for a lot of people. I'll give you an example. Like I'm going through the mess decks and I see this young lady. Chow was over. She was sitting there by herself. She had the phone propped up, and you could see her daughter on. It was like FaceTime or something. Her daughter on there sitting at like a pretend school desk, and the mom was pretending to be the teacher, and the daughter was pretending to be the student. They were doing like role play. I'm like, I have never seen this in my life
I can't believe a ship
on a
actually
ship.
had good enough FaceTime at sea to be able to do something like that.
I would say most of the time it was not like that, but for some reason she figured it out and it was working, right?
That's great.
When you have 5,000 people trying to get on the Wi-Fi, it doesn't work that well.
But at least you had it.
At least we had it.
I never had it, and I can't even begin to tell you what a game changer that would have been for people. And one of the things that I think that I love about your command philosophy too is that you say people need to feel valued, and then people need to feel loved. And I
Yes.
think that we have a hard time in the military using that word love. Can you
It is.
explain a little more about
Yeah,
that?
it's not a military thing. That was probably the only innovation in that whole document. The only thing that's kind of new,
Hmm.
which isn't new, is that all humans desire to be loved and valued. It's inherent, right? Now, I
Right.
was watching a movie recently, and I can't remember the movie, but there was a woman in it. She says, "I don't need to be loved and valued. I need to have purpose." Well, I have that in there too, mission and purpose. But I think generally people need both sets, and this is like the foundation, the beginning of morale. Like every decision you make has to take those things into account. Are we loving and valuing people by this decision or not? If it's a tough decision, like, hey, we're going to extend you for a month, people are going to feel a little bit off on that, but you have to remind them about the mission and purpose, right? And eventually people get it. They're like, yeah, this stinks, but I understand why we're out here because,
Mhm.
our leadership has talked about it so much. But yeah, so the love piece, I mean, maybe it's Maslow's hierarchy. Maybe I'm stealing from that. And this is what leaders do. We steal good ideas and carry on.
Right. And I think that there just wasn't, before you came along, somebody who was so transparent on social media too, who was doing these things. I mean, we all have had really good bosses in the military. We've all served under these wonderful leaders. I can't even tell you how many good leaders I've worked for. But in this new era, there is this other piece where the sailors, that is their new town hall, is social media. And
Yeah.
the leaders that can adapt and can go on social media and use these tools themselves is still relatively new. So, tell us a little bit about how that started for you. Was that at the beginning of the deployment that you decided that that was going to be a piece of your strategy to lead, or did that come later on?
Yeah, I think at the beginning, Well, we had the Wi-Fi, so it was a necessary technological capability. I
Hmm.
went to my public affairs officer and I said, "Hey, I'd like to, do some social media engagement or whatever." And she's like, "Hey, you should try out, this site and this site." And I said, "Okay, can you help me out?" So she helped me get started, and we went from there. My initial strategy was to just kind of talk about the way of the warrior sailor.
Right.
Maybe I was hoping to engage with other people that are interested in leadership. Maybe I thought maybe sailors would look at this. And I would say overall, the sailors, some did look at my stuff, but most didn't. I
Yep, and
was,
here it is, by the way, for people that wanna
oh, yeah,
see as I'm gonna just scroll down as you talk, but, I mean,
yeah,
this is quite the like, almost like a manifesto, and it's written in very plain language, so,
yeah,
if you guys follow, Captain Chowdah Hill on, LinkedIn, you'll actually see it up. I think you posted in your featured, section
yeah,
there,
yeah.
so
And the graphics and stuff were made by sailors from the media department. The picture that was up with the guy carrying another guy that was made by aviation ordnanceman who's just really good at artwork, and so he did that for me. Um, yeah, but anyway, so yeah, with the social media, trying to get that
Mhm,
document out because I thought it had some value and it was just a little bit different, but it sort of took on a life of its own because what the first moment you post a picture of a sailor like that one,
mhm,
some mom or dad or spouse gets
sure,
really excited. And yeah, and I know this because like if I get a newsletter from my daughter's schools, I'm looking for a picture of them somewhere in there, right? I
right.
get excited about that. So I said, okay, I'll put a few more out. And then the family readiness group found out and they said, oh, guess what? Go to the captain's social media site. He has pictures of the sailors. And so then I started getting hundreds and hundreds of requests from parents and spouses and friends to like, please put so and so up on the captain's chair. Please give him a cookie. All of a sudden, it became the cookie chair because we figured what's a nice way to we bring in someone out of work and bringing them all the way up to the top of the island. We might as well give them something, so we would give them a cookie. We also gave them coins. I mean, this was and that took a life that took on another life of its own because it was I said, hey, maybe this is somewhat good for recruiting, but then I thought of the audience. I'm like, the audience is essentially moms and dads. It's people that are a little younger than me or my age, but maybe that's okay for recruiting because they can convince other people to join. I don't
But
know.
it was so much bigger than that though, because people like myself on LinkedIn were seeing what you were doing, and I think even people in other services were seeing it. As
Oh
I
yeah,
saw you on the Army Captain EOD gentleman.
yeah.
I saw that
EOD
podcast.
happy captain.
Yeah, Happy Captain. He's
Yeah,
great. And
yeah,
so Pete, you were making an impact on other people too who had never seen something like this. I mean, we had seen Gervy Alata on the USS John P. Murtha. He's the first O6 that I've ever seen post himself on social media. And he did that on Instagram, and he's very good with all the visuals and the
sure.
videos and things
He's
like that.
awesome. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's an amazing motivator and an
He's the
amazing.
first one I ever heard about. I'm like, you
Mhm,
know
me
what?
too.
Maybe I could do this too.
Right.
Well, I
And that's
can't
the
do it like
thing.
him. He's awesome.
No, 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 and I mean, it surprises me that he doesn't have videographer experience or something along those
Yeah.
lines. I mean, he when he told I had him on my show, and when he said, "No," he said, "My daughter just showed me how to run through things," and I think he just got real creative with it, and it took on a life of its own, just like with your
Yeah.
social media. But that's the whole point, is that we need those people like yourself and like Gervy who get out there and do it first and show that it's possible. And the fact that you did it during a combat deployment, that to me is also groundbreaking. And I'm sure you
Yeah.
had some challenges navigating that.
Right. Yeah. So you got to be super, super careful about the OPSEC piece.
Oh
Every
yeah.
picture, every video, you got to really double check it. I was also concerned about people's personal identities, so I would kind of bleed out their name tags. At first, I wasn't really getting consent. Talked to some lawyers and said, "Yeah, I should probably get consent for people to be posted." I said, "That's great." So I try to very carefully approach this in a professional way, and you got to kind of look at if you're a senior leader, maybe not so much a junior sailor or a junior officer, but as a senior leader, it is definitely a professional slash personal account. Sort of has a hybrid uh, distinction to it. So you have to follow all the rules that the command uh,
Right.
page will follow, right, as best as you can. But you also have you have the ability to be yourself too as an individual, which is fun. But yeah, the OPSEC piece, obviously, one of the pitfalls and one of the concerns that some had, including myself, was that what if something really bad did happen? How would I handle that? Because that would change the whole tone of what I was trying to
It
put
would have.
out.
It would
So
have.
yeah, I didn't have a really good plan for that. So I was worried about the whole time,
But you would have
you know?
just been a human. I think that as a human, we have our serious
Right.
side, we have our morale coach side, and then you would have just been in full blown serious,
Yeah.
somber. That's how I feel, because I think that our audiences understand that there's a time to be silly and there's a time to be funny and there's a time to
Yeah.
be very serious, very focused. And I think your audience would have adjusted.
I think so too. Yeah. The first time I saw social media mean anything to me from a tactical sense was during Fukushima in 2011. If you remember when,
I do.
yeah. So the tidal wave and then the meltdown of the plant there.
Hmm.
And I was watching the Atsugi base CMC give constant updates on Facebook. And when people would ask a question in the comments, he would answer right back. He was coordinating flights to get people out of there, to move people. Oh, do we need to have pets on? Can we have pets on the flights? Yes,
Yes.
you can, and so on. So it was just a master's class in like how to lead via social media in a time of crisis. So I knew that if I had a platform, I could potentially switch it to something like that if we needed to. It just didn't have to happen. It didn't happen, so that's good. Well, not yet anyway.
Well, no, it happened in small ways. So I
Right,
wouldn't say it didn't happen completely, because you definitely had some disinformation campaigns from the other
right.
side that tried to say certain things. I recall that at some point there was some news reporting on X that the Eisenhower had sunk, and
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that.
So there were a couple instances, and I made kind of a claim that allegedly we had been sunk 3 times, and that made some media. I was being a little jokey about that, but yeah. So once you have that presence out there on the social media, eventually they're going to find you, and they did, and they would engage me in DMs or whatever. By engage means I didn't engage back, says I don't do that, right?
Right,
So
right.
I was getting attacked a lot, and you just got to suck it up. And if they said there was a hole in the flight deck, all I had to do was a video of the flight deck, normal operations. I mean, it was that easy. And so yeah, that happened a few times, and
And
for
I
some
and
reason
also
that made news.
you had media on the on the carrier throughout the operations. You
Right,
were embarking media who were able to attest to what was also going on during this
right,
deployment, and I think
yeah,
that also helped. I mean, because I do think there's this combination in this new digital era where we are still engaging with our traditional media and our trusted journalists from some of the international outlets, but then there's also the podcast that we're doing now. There's this whole new kind of media that exists out there that us public affairs officers have to be very prepared to engage with
right.
once we're out there. And I can only imagine that your PAO was very busy keeping up with all these things.
Oh yeah, aircraft carrier PAO. That is like the ultimate job for public affairs, I think.
It
'Cause she's
is.
also balancing the entire strike group as well as the ship, and herding all kinds of cats, media cats coming on board and stuff. What's interesting is being in the Red Sea. It is not an easy place to get to. So we were concerned that that might kind of inhibit the media presence, but they figured it out, and so we had plenty. I think I did something like 32 interviews at deployment.
Yeah. And Stacy Dem, I always try to get to some of these chats in here. She says, "Thank God for Viper Team," which is the visual information. I can't remember the entire acronym. It's been a while, but it's basically
Yeah.
the people who go out there with the cameras and they're taking pictures of any unsafe or unprofessional encounters at sea. So
Yep, we
that is,
practiced it a lot and we did it for real. Yep,
yeah,
for
you sure
sure.
did. And
Yep.
you also assisted vessels in distress. I think I saw read somewhere where it was one of them had 24 civilian mariners. Tell us a little bit about that.
This is a great story. And it really encapsulated the entire deployment in kind of a positive way. So we get word that a ship has been hit. I think it was a motor vessel Tudor, Tudor, and typical merchant vessel has about 25 sailors, and so they did. And we heard that one of those sailors was likely deceased because of the attack, and the ship was kind of sinking. And what's interesting is a lot of vessels that went by from countries that, that could have helped out, but didn't. But of course, we're America, so we decided to get involved. And I wasn't involved in the operation personally at first because this involved the USS Philippine Sea, basically taking one of their helicopters and picking up each person one by one from that ship
Mm.
over back to the Phil Sea. And the Phil Sea brought all of them back to the Ike. So we hosted them. I was doing something else, and I told my guys, "Hey, make sure they feel special, right? They just had a hard time, a traumatic experience. We're going to try to get them home to." They were from the Philippines, and so I was really busy, and I was worried that they, maybe they weren't getting taken care of or whatever. But so I finally went down to check on them, and my guys had put out a buffet lunch with like sternos and all these food options. They were singing songs in Tagalog because our Tagalog, our Filipino Association put out a call to anybody on board who can speak Tagalog, come down now, right? Our Catholic priest was also Filipino. He was holding court there. It was really a magical moment to see like the diversity of the U.S. Navy and what we're capable of doing. And they were all wearing Eisenhower ball caps, which was beautiful. And as they were leaving, we put them on a cod, and we had a whole team trying to work the diplomatic clearances to get them back to Bahrain and eventually home. The whole Filipino government was involved, and I'm giving them fist bumps as they're leaving the ship. It was something else. And again,
Wow.
that was towards the end of deployment. I'm like, this is one of the greatest moments of my life.
That really is, and it really just shows you the power of what people do when they come together and
Yeah.
they realize that we're all one team, and
Yeah, and it's like the Philippine Association. It was 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds. They were just excited. They didn't know what they're going to do, and the folks there, they spoke English well, but it was the opportunity to speak in your home language with U.S. Navy sailors.
yeah.
That's something else. We had another incident, another rescue involved. We got one guy who had a man overboard, brought him out to the ship. And I was so excited. I was going to get to meet him, and I was sure he was going to be really happy that we rescued him. But he sustained some injuries, and he was getting taken care of. And I was like, and he spoke Hindu. Is it Hindu or Hindi? I forget. But
Mhm.
I was like, does anybody speak, Hindu? And a bunch of the sailors are like, yeah, we got this one young lady who's a ABH3 or something. I'm like, how do you know she really speaks it? Because a lot of people claim to speak languages. They're like, well, she was arguing with her husband for 30 minutes in Hindu on the phone the other day. Right? So I was like, okay, she's good. So bring her in. So we brought her in to help do the translation and make the guy feel more comfortable.
No, that's wonderful, and I'm sure those are just memorable experiences on either side, and it's really just making the best out of a not so obviously not so ideal
Yeah.
situation. What do you think were some of the key factors that you saw within your crew that they did to keep the morale up? Not things that you instituted, but some of the initiatives that you saw people undertaking.
So one of the greatest things about ships that we don't often talk about is all these separate organizations that kind of form organically, grassroots organizations like multicultural committees. Our Caribbean Sailors Association is huge on the ship for whatever reason. They have the best T-shirts, and they cross all departments and squadrons and bring people together, right? So they did a lot of activities. Some of them were incredible dances. There wasn't much time to do all this stuff, and it was super hot, so people sweating constantly. But they did it, and again, I did not control any of that. I just showed up every now and then and said thank you. But that I love the grassroots stuff. That's you want to create an environment where that happens, and it's just
Mhm.
nurtured. Sometimes an organization will form and they don't do a super job of being organized. So you can bring in the chiefs to kind of help mentor them through the process and how to set up like fundraising and have a treasurer and all that stuff, and so they can keep it like legal.
Right.
And so the whole ship needs to be involved in making sure that they can have that organization. So we had a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, those things are so important because, I mean, let's face it, it's stressful being on deployment and being on an aircraft carrier, and you have quite the challenge on your hands too with such a big crew. I think that when you go on a small boy, because I've been on both, on a destroyer, there's just inherently sometimes this small town environment, but with a ship of 4,000 sailors, all these different departments. I mean, my God, like deck department in itself is its own command. And
Yeah.
so how did you find ways through your HODs, your heads of department, which are the department heads? How did you find ways to unify them to kind of bring everybody together?
Oh, that's a good question. I never talk about the HODs enough, the heads of department. Yeah, so there's 20 departments, and this is just for my crew, which is about 3,000, maybe more like 2,800. Some of them, like air department's about 600 people traditionally, reactor department 450. So these are people that were previous COs that take these jobs. So they're already outstanding. They've already been vetted. But you also have some HODs that are like, junior lieutenant commanders, and they have the smaller
Right.
department. Media might be an example of that,
Yeah.
right?
Or JAG.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. The JAG, right? And so, some of them will fleet up to commander over their time. But how do you create unity of the team, right? That I don't have a good answer for that. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. If there is a conflict, you've got to step in and resolve it. My expectation, and it's also in the way of the warrior sailor, is that they work together, right? So I evaluate them on their ability to work together, right?
Right.
So there
Because
were times
conflict's a
when,
part of life. I mean,
yeah,
conflict's a part of life. It's going to happen.
it's going to happen, but I tell you, the group we had on this deployment, it was somewhat magical. They were so outstanding. Just let them do their jobs, and they're happy, and they will do their jobs.
Mhm.
Sometimes you give them strategic direction. Say, hey, here are my priorities. Like, I want more painting done on this ship because it's getting dirty. So I need all 20 HODs to do something, and they did, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes they would share resources across departments because they were that good. So I got really lucky with those ones.
Wow. And then tell me a little bit about what it was like. So for people that aren't familiar with aircraft carrier operations as well, is you not only have the heads of department and how they have to work together, then you as the CO, you're part of this other team of warfare commanders. And the warfare commanders come together with the strike group, and then they do their sets of many daily meetings
Right.
where they all have to get together. And there's somebody that's representing the small boy ships. You've got somebody, and you can explain this better than I can, somebody who represents all the squadrons, and then yourself, and that's a whole other production in and of itself. So tell me a little bit about that
Yeah.
coordination.
So that's the next layer of necessary coordination, right? The air wing commander, the destroyer squadron commander, the CO of the cruiser, and the information warfare commander, and then me. So we had, it was a good environment where we're supposed to make the decisions, right? And or at least provide the recommendation for a decision to an admiral. The thing about the carrier is, like, everything I do affects all of them. So I'm like the ultimate supporter of what they do.
Yep.
And in terms of sometimes people, sometimes equipment, sometimes I have guys who help fix some of the aircraft. And at the same time, like, I also have the megaphone, the 1MC. And so if they're on my ship, and we had about 4,800, I'm also providing them the information. So I have to contribute to their morale as well. So it's just an interesting dynamic, but I consider it a challenge. I mean, we had a tough road. It wasn't, I was appealing to my own crew, but I also had to kind of expand that to more people, which is fine. And so we did that. But I'll say the warfare commanders, we were just lockstep together. We had disagreements all the time, but we sorted those out like professionals, and then we come up with the final answer and then stick with it, right?
Hmm.
And we didn't talk about each other behind each other's backs. None of that stuff that I've seen in the past and other parts of my life, that did not happen on this one, as far as I can tell, unless they were
Right.
talking about me, which they probably did, because I'm the crazy one.
Right. Well, and I think that, like, we all have to understand that like I said, and we're saying, is that disagreements are a part of life, and you have to learn how to work with people that you're not going to always see eye to eye with. But I think that's like what you said, that's part of the challenge of
Right.
leadership, and that's part of the challenge of learning how to work with people. What was your advice to people? One of the things that I am challenged as a leader, and I know a lot of others are too, is you've got people at so many different skill levels on your team. So you've got the people that are just head and shoulders advanced and already know all the things and can do the job with their eyes closed. And then you have other people that might be struggling and have maybe some mental health issues, or they don't understand the job very well. How did you, as you saw your teams, how were you able to bring up the rear and then also not bring down the star performers? I've always found that to be somewhat of a challenge.
Yeah, I haven't really thought about that piece too much. I mean, you recognize good work, and some of that good, obviously, your star performers need to get recognized. And then there's other people that you would say, the average person say they're just doing their job, right? Well, they're just doing their job at 9 months of sea, with only 2 port calls, and they haven't seen their family in, this long. Like their life is on hold back home because of it. So is that just doing your job? They're serving their country, right? So recognizing the value of that for the normal performers, if you will. And then
Mhm.
you have, you're going to always have underperformers, right? And uh, again, you got to be very careful if you start to say, well, those sailors are not model sailors. I get very antsy when I hear the model sailor, because like, what does that look like, right?
Right.
Well, it shouldn't look like anything. Sailors are sailors. We're a cut of the society. We should see variety. Um, but the ones that aren't performing, it's going to take a little bit more time, right? We all know this, and that's just part of our burden of leaders. But just rest assured that oftentimes people mature over time. And when I look at a sailor that's say 19, I also see them at 79 when they have a walker, maybe an oxygen tank, and they're talking about their time on the ice. They don't see that, but I see them. I see them
Mhm.
getting on social media in their 40s saying, "I'm a veteran and this is what I believe," that kind of stuff. And but just kind of being patient, and then when they do make improvements, you've got to recognize it, or else you lost that
You lost
opportunity.
that opportunity, and
Yeah.
I think you're right. It's also seeing in each person that there's not a mold. I think sometimes we tend to wanna pigeonhole every sailor, every person in the military as fitting a certain mold, but even in
Right.
your philosophy, I love that you put creativity in there, because I think as a creative, we sometimes get, a little bit not as, I would say, not as valued sometimes in the eyes of certain people, just because our skills are so different than, let's say, an engineer or
Right.
somebody along those lines. And I think you got to appreciate all the skills of your team.
Right. The creativity piece is two parts to that, right? There's creativity in the work that you do, and like the work that you do in public affairs and media. That there's so much opportunity for creativity there. For whatever reason, my media folks are really creative, right? And I've seen that in other ships. I don't know how the Navy picks them. Maybe all that creativity exists everywhere. It's just that we allow it to flourish in that environment. I don't
We
know,
do.
but it's good, right? Yeah. So, but what about if your talents and creativities don't contribute to the mission? Well, they still contribute, right? So we want people to have little hobbies or whatever. Like my hobby was social media. When I was the XO of the Bush, it was playing the ukulele. My email was slow, so I'd wait for it to send, and I'd learn some chords or whatever, right? And then on the Arlington, I like to do drawing. But these little things enrich you as a human person, which makes the deployment more palatable, I think.
I think
So
you're right.
so everyone needs a little bit of time for their own little hobbies. I just, sometimes those hobbies can become your career later on in life, right? So, you don't have to do
Like,
the same thing forever.
no, and I think that everybody's creative. Like, I do. I think that everyone
Yeah.
has something that they can think outside the box about, something they can have an idea about, a way that they can think about something differently. And that is also what is amazing about serving in the Navy and serving on an aircraft carrier or any ship really is the diversity of people that you run across. I mean,
Yeah.
every like you said, every single nationality, every single cultural ways of cultural differences, they're all there, and
Yeah.
everybody has to work together and accomplish the mission.
Yeah. We're kind of, a lot of people get worked up about that kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, slow down. All right. I get who I get, and I'm going to make it work. Right. This is my family. The family is what you got. So you make it work. And so I think we do a pretty good job of that in the Navy. I think in terms of diversity and the cross section of the world, like you said, we have multiple sailors from other countries. Several are working through citizenship processes, trying to get their families from overseas to come, because they just did a 9-month deployment. I think they should get some preference in immigration status, but I don't control that process. But I love that stuff too. And my favorite part is like if we pull into a port, which we didn't do much of, but I kept saying, hey, I look forward to pulling in anywhere and watching every one of you come off that brow and for them to see you and say, that's America. Because we're a mix, I love that.
Yeah, we really are. We are such a mix. And I think that was one of my favorite things about some of the port calls as a PAO was that I could get the sailors, like let's say we went to the Philippines, I could get Filipino sailors to get off the ship and then interact with the media. And it was always just such a neat environment to see that liaison work in action.
Love it.
It's so interesting. And it really exposes people to things that they just never would have thought of if they hadn't had that opportunity. So tell me a little bit about what's next now. So you're back from deployment. You guys are in I guess are you going to go through a yard period, or is that what's next for you? Okay. All right.
Yeah. So we're getting ready for a yard period, about a year plus. This will get us set up to do a couple more deployments before the end of life of the ship. All right. A lot of people are like, so you're switching ships now, or is the crew moving something? No, we stay with the ship. It's always manned 24/7. And we needed to bring it down. There was a lot of things we couldn't do while we're up to sea for that long that we can now actually fix. Plus, the ship is going on 47 years old. Only carriers last that long, but not all the equipment lasts that long on the carriers. So that's always a challenge. So unfortunately for my crew, they end up doing a little bit more work, in my opinion, than you would on a newer aircraft carrier because of the age of the system. We have to take that into account for manning.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's the plan. Yep. I think that there's a appreciation that I think you have with an older aircraft. Like I said, I was on USS Nimitz, and it was very similar. It's a very old aircraft carrier, and it would have some of the same. I would imagine some of the same issues that you guys experienced on your deployment. And I think that you adopting that approach that we were the best damn ship in the Navy, I think is a really good way to look at it, because it like you said, there might not be a statistical way to measure that, but if people think that, and if people treat it that way, then that's what it's going to be.
Yeah, that was a calculated risk. I looked at the people even before I took command, and I said, wow, there's a lot of talent here. There's a lot of people that want to be the best. So let's just make the claim, right? So, whether or not it's true doesn't really matter. It's what comes from it. And I think people eventually realize that the ship is not the actual ship. It's the people that, make it wonderful. And that's exactly what we were able to prove. And even during this deployment, we did multiple inspections. I know it sounds crazy doing inspections when you're, in a combat zone, but some of these we had to do. And we got them done, and we crushed it across the board. Huge improvements from last year. We defied all the odds. We shouldn't have done well. We did. So it was kind of like it was validation for me that, hey, I told you we're the best damn ship in the Navy. You just made it happen, right? So it's sort of like a prophecy that came true.
Well, I really enjoyed all the posts. If you guys go back through his LinkedIn post and you scroll down, you can just see all the different. I think the ones that were particularly, I think, people's favorites were the cookie posts, but not just because it was a picture of a sailor with a cookie. What I really appreciated about it was that there was always a personal story about who that sailor was, who they were saying hello to, some sort of a factoid that you gathered in that moment. And I thought, wow, that's such a neat way to just honor the individual and then honor the bigger picture of what that person is part of at the same time. Right. And tell me a little bit about the parents and the reaction that they had.
It was very emotional sometimes. Obviously the parents were ecstatic, and I'd make them wait weeks and months before they'd see their kid. And a lot of them, like I said, I wasn't able to answer, and I feel bad about that, but I was completely overwhelmed, and I can only spend a small portion of my day on social media with everything that's going on. Right. What was fun, my favorite part was when we would bring them up to the bridge and I'd say, hey, your wife sent me a message. She wanted to see you because she misses your, handsome face. Or I just read what they say.
Right.
Yeah. And some of them would break down crying. It was it was emotional.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I would get choked up. I'm like, all right, let's just take a breath here. And I'd offer them the cookie. And there were a few folks that took several minutes to just calm down.
Mm.
And so it was just special, right? And again, I talked at the beginning about having, I don't know if I talked about this, but having a menu of ways to recognize sailors. That was just one, right? Everybody should have another way to we have the warrior of the day, right? We bring people up to the bridge, we give them coins. I actually gave them a box of cookies. My CSs, my culinary specialists, would make an entire box for them, make them feel special. They got the warrior sailor pin. There's a poem that you have to read in order to give the pin. You know, we try to make it special every time. A lot of other ships do this. Even individual departments had their, sailors of the month, and you have sailors of the year. I mean, there's so many opportunities to recognize people. You just have to be proactive about it, because it won't happen on its own, right?
No, it
You
won't. It
really
takes
got to
work.
think about it.
Yeah, it takes
So,
work, but it's worth it. I think also another thing I was impressed by, I think you mentioned it in the podcast that you did with the EOD Army gentleman, is that you were saying about when you first got there. And I thought, wow, this must have taken forever to do. But I think you said that you brought in about 15 sailors at a time. And
yeah.
then you would just bring them up to the, not to the wardroom, but to the import cabin, and you would
Yes.
just have them sit down, and you would just have like a sensing session, or well, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So normally when you take command, you're supposed to do, I don't know if it's legal, it's required or whatever, but you do CO's calls. You bring in a
Mhm.
large group of people and you say, okay, this is who I am. Here's my philosophy.
Right,
Right.
right. Very one way. Yes,
Yes. Now, interestingly, during COVID, when I was on the Arlington, you couldn't have more than 10 people in the room. I don't know if you remember this.
I do.
So they were like, sir, we can only do 10 people at a time. I'm like, this is going to take forever. I had 400 people and it was going to take 4 months. We did the math. So we did it, and it was awesome. It was way more intimate. I was less nervous too, because everybody gets nervous and, with large crowds.
Sure.
But I told stories. I try to warm them up, ask some questions, and then they would open up. So sometimes it was, they just wanted to talk. Sometimes they had complaints. I'm writing stuff down. I'm, half the complaints I can't even do anything about, right? But
Sure.
at least I'm trying, I'm listening, and I'm apologizing. And I would take the time to talk about the future. Here's the schedule. And I'd give them some inside information that I hadn't put out in the
Which
one.
everyone loves.
Yeah.
Everyone loves that.
So I did that, goodness, I think 115 times, and I'm still not done yet. So I've gotten about, I think, 2,500 sailors so far.
Wow.
And some of them were bigger than 15. Some were
Sure.
smaller than that. Yeah.
But
But
wow,
it's
that's so
it's
impressive.
awesome. It's
That's so
another way to
cool.
get instant feedback,
Oh, I know. And then everybody will have that memory, and then everybody will have that moment of familiarization and being in that group setting. I can remember when I was on my carrier on Nimitz, there was a night that we hosted. I can't remember if it was, I think it was during one of our DV embarks. We decided to do a dinner in the CO's import cabin, and it was around Christmas time. And I remember I suggested, it was Captain Lennox, my CO at the time. I said, "Why don't we do some Christmas music?" And we did. We put on like Christmas music. We had it going, and it reminded me of, when I was growing up with my mom and dad, and we'd have these very fancy dinners, and we would just all be talking, and it was just, it reminded me of such a family atmosphere. And I just remember afterwards, the CO and the XO at the time, they were just like, that was probably one of the most pleasant dinners that we've had on the ship. And it was just a bunch of people talking and, sharing. And I think that that's what you're talking about just reminds me of that. Really
we did some of that too. The reactor officer was looking at ways to incentivize sailors to do well on their monthly exams. So we decided that if they, if anyone had the top score or the most improved in various categories, they would get a pizza party, and I would host it. And so I brought them up to the import cabin, same room as I did the CO's calls. CSs would make some pizza and some wings. And I'm like, the one thing I'm missing is music. So I got Spotify, and I just typed in 80s dance music and just played that in the background. That's all I knew, right? So it was always awkward at first. Everyone's like, "Ooh, this is really formal." And then eventually people just kind of soften up and they start talking. It takes about 20 minutes to get them there.
Yep. That was kind of like it was for us too. I mean, I remember the beginning of the dinner, it was very formal and all these things. And then we were just, and I mean, I think it was having the DVs there, and they're civilians. They don't know anything about the ship. They're not concerned with the daily schedule or any of the work stuff. So of
Right.
course we just had to talk, about our families and about who we really were as people for that dinner. And I just
Yeah.
remember that couple hours that night was probably one of the most pleasant evenings I had that whole deployment, because we just were ourselves for that whole hour, and it was just, or a couple hours, and it was just a really neat memory. But we've got a lot of comments, and I haven't gotten to any of them, so I'm just going to get to just a few of them.
Okay.
My one friend Jason Wilson, hey Teresa, he said he was going to join. We had a lot of people who are joining tonight. Tim Franklin, he said, I would like to express my sincere gratitude for your efforts in providing this live stream. Our military is currently facing challenges related to retention and maintaining positive morale, and your insights and guidance are invaluable during this time. Thank you for your support.
Thanks,
And
Tim.
then, yep, Eric Amendon said, thank you for an awesome podcast. This was great. You both exemplify what is great about the USN.
Hoo-yah.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. And then we also have Cliff Fraser, who says, Chris, really enjoyed seeing the journey of your deployment via LinkedIn. Your leadership style is infectious. Hoo-yah, brother. Cliff, retired Navy EOD. And then
Hoo-yah.
LinkedIn user, I can't see what your name is, but I can check afterwards. You just said, thank you so much for this. So
Oh yeah. Where's the negative comments? Come on now.
I know, right? Where's all the bad? But
Yeah.
I don't think there really can be a lot of bad when you're just spreading positivity, and you're spreading joy, and you're doing things to bring people together. And I always do believe this in my heart, is that when you take care of people, the mission just follows. And it sounds like that's what
Yeah.
happened on this during this tour for you, and during your previous tours. So tell me a little bit about what is next for you after this job. Do you have anything that you have in mind, or what would you like to do?
No, I got about I think a year left, or maybe less now. I'm not sure. Um, I don't know. Either I get out or I stay in if I get promoted.
Mm-hmm.
If I get out, I really have no plan right now, but I'll figure it out. I have
Right.
honestly no idea. I've never done something else, so I am so indoctrinated in the Navy. 28 years now, so I don't
Well,
know.
I definitely think that your leadership expertise and the lessons that you've shared, even with your philosophy, the way you've done communications, some of the things that you did on this deployment will be examples for others to follow, and will make good stories. Should you ever want to take up speaking or a book, or anything along those lines, I do think that there's that potential.
Yeah, I had been working on a book for a couple of years, and I need to revise it now that I have new data. And I am just not completely motivated now because I have other things. Like I still
Sure.
have to be, I don't have much time to do that, and I have kids, and I have
Yes,
my daughter going to college next weekend, so there's priorities there. But I
of course.
will get it done, and it'll be something like The Way of the Warrior Sailor with, some data behind it and some more in-depth discussion. But I think that the hypothesis that morale can lead to success, it's been proven so many times in world history, going back thousands of years. I think it's something that we need to kind of recapitalize and bring it back.
I
Because
agree.
I had a former XO that was going to CO school, and he's in the class, and he said, "Hey, my CO says morale is the way, right?" And people kind of rolled their eyes, so like they think, "Oh, this is happiness, there's more time off," and he's like, "No, it's way deeper than that, right?" It requires you to think, and it does involve things like loving and giving purpose and that kind of stuff. And gosh, this would work in any industry. It just works at home, you know.
Yes, it
So
works in families. Like
yeah,
you say, it works in the way you treat your friends. It works in, I mean, gosh, I have neighbors that we've been hanging out with the last few nights, and they're in their 70s, and they've been teaching us a lot about living day to day, and the ways in which you take care of your neighbors, and you have these daily events that you do with other people, and the way that you just take care of your community around you. So
right.
so the things that you're talking about are so universal. They're not about the Navy. They're not about even leadership, really. They're just about kindness and treating people with
Yep.
dignity and respect, valuing them, having a purpose, and
Yeah.
finding a way to give back, figuring out what your purpose is, and using that to give back and to be of service, which is what this podcast, Stories of Service, is all about. So I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to interview you. Is there anything that I didn't cover on that you would like to put out there?
No, I think you covered it. I did put out one thing. I put out a post a while back. I said, "Here's my advice for social media for senior leaders." And you called me out on one item, which really made me think, and I appreciate this because it's kind of changed my view. I said something to the effect, "Hey, stop talking about yourself and start talking about your sailors," right?
Hmm.
And I've revised that. I think that that's something for me to do, but there are some people, we, like you said, they should be talking about themselves and their story. And so that was a good lesson learned for me. I appreciate that. I kind of look back at some of the people I follow on Instagram and other places that are in the Navy, and I like their content. It's kind of about them, but they're
Hmm.
showing what life is like, and that's good, right? And it's not
That's
like a
very
it's not like a giant humble brag, It's just it's some of it's kind of cute, some of it is just some is funny, right?
right. And
So
I
keep
think
it
that
coming.
and I think there's a way in which you do it. I don't think that when you share it's, oh my gosh, look at me, I'm so great, let me brag about everything that I'm doing. But I think that when you've had certain experiences, or when there's been things that have happened that will that others can learn from, and that also I think that when you write and when you share your story, there's something cathartic about it, and there's something that's therapeutic about it. And I
Yeah,
think that we need to encourage people to be able to do that, because I think that that's where the dialogue happens too, is because everybody has their own perspective and their own way of looking at something. But if we
right,
don't get our stories out there to one another, then we hold on to things. At least that's what I did. And we hold on to resentments, and we're not transparent with one another. And so
right,
I appreciate you saying that. I understood what you meant by that, but I
right,
just think that we've got to also not make it always be this whole idea of it's never about me, because it's not necessarily about you, but it might be the fact that you have a story that may be of value to other people,
right.
and you shouldn't feel bashful or ashamed to share that, or feel like you shouldn't because it's about you. So,
Right. And, some of the posts, and I'll stop talking, I promise. Some of the posts are like really just silly stuff. So I did an experimental silly post. I didn't put it like that, but it
mhm,
was just basically me walking upstairs
I saw
and
that.
me sitting at my desk. And for some reason that was widely shared. So it's just an experiment.
Well, you know what? And you're being creative, and you're showing
Yeah.
that I think there's so many different ways to do social media. I mean, some of the most popular creators out there are the ones that are the funniest. And I will say that humor is an incredibly effective and
Oh yeah.
powerful way to get a message out there. And it will resonate with people. Like, I think I did one the other day of me with a shake weight. And I think the whole point was that, like, we all care what people think,
Yeah.
but I think it takes somebody who's courageous to, number one, admit that yes, we do care what people think, but then number two, we still be ourselves anyway, and we still get out there and we put ourselves in the arena. And
Right.
so, and then I was like, I was on a cruise ship and I was holding the shake weight for the '80s mixtape workout, and I thought, well, that's probably a good shot to get to put with that photo. But I mean, I think that's an example of, I don't know why I thought that would be the best shot to put with that
Right.
photo,
And do those
but I
things even exist still? So that's
well,
interesting by
apparently,
itself
yes,
too.
they're on
Yeah.
the Virgin cruise ship. They have an '80s mixtape workout, and everybody shows up in their '80s costume. And
Yeah.
yes, they have shake weights there, and it's really over the top, and it's really fun. I
I
get to go
probably
back.
wouldn't go to that.
Oh,
Just to be
it's
honest.
actually really amazing. I mean, like, they literally show up in leotards and leg warmers, and
Yeah.
yeah. So I get to go on the Virgin Celebration cruise early September with Richard Branson and Boy George. So
Oh,
I will see this once again
good on
here
you.
in a couple weeks. But thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate this opportunity. Like I said, I know you're very, very busy, and I know that you've got a lot of busy times ahead, but please keep doing what you're doing on social media when you have the chance. It's fun, it's creative, people appreciate it, and you've got a message to share, and one that I think a lot of people value. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Teresa. You keep up the good work, and thanks for making me think. I appreciate it.
Awesome, awesome. All right, I will meet you backstage to say goodbye while I go full
Okay.
screen and do a quick closeout. But thank you guys. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me tonight. I do have one more podcast this week with Dr. Paul Lawrence. He was a former undersecretary for the Department of Veterans Affairs. So I'm really inspired to talk to him about veterans benefits, because, of course, as I'm inching towards my retirement, and many of you are probably either in the same boat or already at the retirement stage, I think we can never get enough of knowing what our benefits are, how to use them, and which avenues are there for us to utilize those benefits. So I hope you can join me tomorrow, and then that'll be my last podcast for this week as I begin our move. So we are moving back to Mississippi, and so we're hot and heavy in that. So I will be stopping podcasts at the end of this month, taking September off, and then starting back up in October. But thank you all for joining me tonight. As I always close out the calls, please take care of yourself, take care of each other, and bye-bye now.